Grant Whitmore lifted my blanket with 2 fingers and smiled at the room. "Come on, babe," he said to my sister. "Your cafeteria sister did her best. You can't expect Tiffany from a lunch lady." Everyone laughed softly. The kind of laugh rich people use when they want cruelty to sound like manners. My sister let her husband drop my handmade quilt and say, "Your broke kitchen sister embarrasses us." I smiled, took it back, and exposed his stolen insurance money. Hours later, he whispered, "Nora, please, don't ruin my family tonight." I stood beside the gift table at Briarwood Garden Club and Event Hall with my hands folded in front of me, feeling every eye in that cream-colored room slide over my dress, my shoes, my old winter coat hanging near the side door. The room smelled like white roses, lemon cake, and money. There were gold-rimmed plates on every table, pale blue ribbons tied around champagne flutes, and a string quartet playing near the tall windows that looked out over the lawns. Women from Westchester sat in pastel suits with pearls at their throats. Men stood near the bar discussing golf, tax shelters, and private schools as if ordinary people were weather patterns. My sister Lena sat in the center of it all, one hand resting on her pregnant belly. She looked beautiful. Soft curls, blush pink dress, diamond earrings Vivian Whitmore had probably chosen for her. She looked like she had been born into that chair. But I remembered another chair, a cracked wooden one in our old Queens apartment, where she used to sit with her knees pulled to her chest while I brushed her hair before school. I had wrapped the blanket in brown paper and tied it with twine, nothing fancy. I thought Lena would understand why. The blanket had taken me 9 months to make, 1 square at a time after my shifts at Harbor Haven Senior Center. 30 squares, 30 pieces of us. A strip from Mom's old scarf, a patch from Lena's butterfly Halloween costume, a corner from the coat she wore on her first day back to school after the funeral, a piece of my first kitchen uniform, a faded bit from the old blanket we shared the winter our heater broke. When Lena pulled it from the paper, the room went quiet. For 1 second, I thought she remembered. Then Vivian Whitmore leaned forward. Vivian never raised her voice. Women like her didn't need to. She touched the blanket with the tips of 2 manicured fingers and gave a tiny smile. "Oh, Nora," she said. "How thoughtful." That pause did more damage than an insult. Lena's cheeks turned red. Not from love, from embarrassment. She looked at the blanket, then at Vivian, then at the guests, waiting for her reaction. "Nora," she said with a nervous little laugh, "you really didn't have to make something. We had a registry at Pottery Barn Kids." Grant stood behind her chair, handsome in his navy blazer, his expensive watch catching the light. He picked up the blanket as if it were something left behind at a yard sale. Then he said what he said. The laugh moved through the room in small, polite waves. No one slapped the knee. No one pointed. That would have been too honest. They just lowered their eyes, smiled into their glasses, and let me know exactly where they thought I belonged. Near the kitchen. Near the loading dock. Near the people who cleared plates after families like the Whitmores were finished celebrating themselves. I did not look at Grant. I looked at Lena. All I needed was 1 sentence. "Don't talk about my sister that way." That was all. I had said worse things to landlords, school clerks, bill collectors, and 1 emergency room receptionist when Lena had a fever of 103. I had stood between her and every hard thing I could reach. I had signed forms, packed lunches, washed uniforms in sinks, worked double shifts, and told her we would be okay, even when I had $12 until Friday. But my sister lowered her eyes. Then she set the blanket back on the gift table, not even folded, and reached for the next package. Vivian smiled wider. "This one is from Tiffany," she announced, as if rescuing the room. I sat down for 10 more minutes because pride sometimes needs a chair before it can stand. I watched Lena unwrap a silver baby spoon, a cashmere crib blanket, and a stroller that cost more than my first car. I heard Vivian whisper the words "Queens" and "cafeteria" to a woman beside her. Finally, I stood. No one stopped me. I walked to the gift table, picked up my blanket, and folded it carefully, corner to corner, edge to edge, memory to memory. My hands did not shake until I reached the hallway. A server near the side door gave me a quick, sympathetic glance. I knew that look. Working people recognize each other even when one of us is pretending not to bleed. Outside, the parking lot glittered with BMWs, Lexuses, and Mercedes SUVs. My old Honda Civic sat near the service entrance, between a catering van and a stack of empty floral crates. I placed the blanket on the passenger seat. For a while, I just sat there with both hands on the wheel. The party music floated faintly through the walls behind me. Somewhere inside, my sister was smiling for photographs under a chandelier in a building she believed belonged to people like Vivian Whitmore. I looked at the glowing windows of Briarwood Garden Club and let out one slow breath. They had laughed at the woman who made breakfast for 76 seniors before sunrise. They had laughed at the coat, the car, the brown paper, the twine. What they did not know was simple. Briarwood was mine. My mother died on a Tuesday morning, under a queen sky the color of wet cement. I was 17. Lena was 8. People say grief comes in waves. In our apartment, grief came like rent, shut-off notices, and an empty refrigerator humming at 2 in the morning. Our father, Ray Navarro, still lived with us then, at least in body. He smelled like cheap whiskey and cold air. For 3 weeks after Mom's funeral, he promised he would get steady, find work, be a father. Then one night, he packed 2 trash bags, took the last $40 from the coffee can, and left. No note for me. No note for Lena. Aunt Marlene drove in from New Jersey and filled out temporary guardianship papers. On paper, she helped keep us together. In real life, she had a sick husband, 2 jobs, and no room for 2 grieving girls. So I woke Lena for school, packed sandwiches, found clean socks, checked homework, and sat beside her bed when fever made her cheeks burn. At 17, I learned childhood can end without warning. One day you are a daughter. The next day you are reading utility bills with a calculator in your hand. When I turned 18, I petitioned for legal guardianship. The judge looked at me for a long time. Lena squeezed my fingers until they hurt. "Do you understand what you're asking for, Miss Navarro?" he asked. I wanted to say no 18-year-old understands that kind of weight. Instead, I said, "Yes, Your Honor. I understand she needs me." Lena told the court she wanted to stay with me. That was enough. I had been accepted into culinary arts at a community college. I kept the letter in my dresser drawer for almost a year. But rent, groceries, school clothes, bus fare, they did not care about dreams. So I worked. Mornings, I served food in a school cafeteria. Evenings, I washed dishes near Steinway Street. Saturdays, I cleaned apartments for women who called me so responsible. Lena never saw the worst if I could help it. She did not see me count coins, water down soup, or cry after a landlord said 2 girls alone were a risk. What she saw was breakfast, clean uniforms, parent-teacher nights, and someone clapping at school concerts, even if I still smelled of fryer oil. One January, the heater broke in apartment 3B. The landlord kept saying someone would come by. No one did. Lena and I slept on the pull-out couch wrapped in an old quilt Mom kept in the hall closet. That night, Lena whispered, "Are we poor?" I held her closer and said, "We're tired. That's different." When I made the baby blanket years later, I cut one square from that quilt and stitched it beside Mom's scarf, Lena's butterfly costume, and the coat she wore when she first returned to school after the funeral. I stitched our life into cotton because some stories are too heavy for words. So when Grant laughed at that blanket, he was not laughing at fabric. He was laughing at the nights I stayed awake so Lena could sleep. He was laughing at the girl I raised before I ever had the chance to become a woman. And Lena let him. At 4:30 every morning, my alarm rang before the city had decided whether it wanted to wake up. Astoria was still dark then. The elevated train shook past my window, rattling the glass above the radiator. I would lie still for one breath, listening to that familiar metal thunder, then get up before loneliness had time to sit beside me. My apartment was old, but it was mine in every way that mattered. The kitchen tiles were cracked near the stove. The hallway smelled faintly of coffee, dust, and winter coats. A thin line of light always slipped under Mrs. Donnelly's door across the hall because she watched game shows until sunrise. I put on black pants, kitchen shoes, and the gray coat Lena used to hate. "You could buy something nicer," she once told me. She had no idea how many nicer things I owned and chose not to wear. My Honda Civic coughed twice before starting. By 5:05, I was driving toward Harbor Haven Senior Center with a travel mug of burnt coffee and the radio low. New York looked softer at that hour. Delivery trucks, bakery lights, sanitation workers, nurses changing shifts, the people who kept the day alive before anyone applauded. At Harbor Haven, I unlocked the kitchen door and turned on the overhead lights. The room smelled of stainless steel, dish soap, and yesterday's chicken stock. I tied on my apron, washed my hands, and started the first pot of oatmeal. Then came scrambled eggs, whole wheat toast, turkey sausage, fruit cups, and decaf coffee for the ones whose doctors had stolen regular coffee from their lives. 76 seniors ate breakfast there most weekdays. I knew Mrs. Whitcomb needed low sodium, but pretended not to. I knew Mr. Alvarez liked extra pepper on his eggs. I knew Mrs. Bailey wanted cinnamon in her oatmeal and would accuse me of forgetting romance if I left it out. I knew which men missed their wives, which women hid overdue bills in their purses, and which ones smiled hardest when their children had not called. "Morning, Miss Nora," Mr. Lou would say, tapping his cane twice near the serving line. "Morning, Mr. Lou. Toast dark, not burned." He would grin. "You know me too well." That was my real work. Not the eggs, not the coffee. Knowing people. To my coworkers, I was steady Nora Navarro, the cook who never missed a shift unless someone was in the hospital. To the seniors, I was the woman who asked, "Did you sleep all right?" and meant it. No one at Harbor Haven knew that before most of them finished breakfast, 3 rent deposits had already landed in business accounts tied to buildings across Queens, Brooklyn, and the Bronx. No one knew I controlled 17 properties through carefully built LLCs. Duplexes, old 3-family houses, small apartment buildings with stubborn boilers, and tenants who needed repairs done before excuses were made. On paper, the portfolio was worth about $12.8 million. After mortgages, taxes, reserves, and all the things people forget when they say real estate money, my net worth sat around $6.4 million. I had another $1.08 million spread between legal reserves, municipal bonds, and conservative stock accounts. I did not say those numbers out loud often. Money grows teeth when the wrong people smell it. Martin Bellamy, my lawyer, used to tell me I was the only client he had who could sign a 7-figure refinancing package in the morning and scrub a soup pot by noon. He thought that was funny. I thought it was balance. The biggest piece was Briarwood Garden Club and Event Hall, 21.5 acres in Westchester, bought through NNV Holdings, LLC in 2021 after the pandemic nearly sank the previous owner. A professional event company leased and operated it. Brides, donors, charity boards, and families like the Whitmores dealt with managers, menus, and floral invoices. They never asked who owned the land. People like Vivian Whitmore rarely look beneath polished floors. They assume ownership wears pearls, not an apron. That morning, after the baby shower, I stood over a tray of toast while Mrs. Whitcomb shuffled toward me with her walker. "You look tired, honey," she said. I smiled and placed her oatmeal on the tray. "Long weekend." She patted my wrist. "Well, don't let anybody make you feel small." For a second, I could not answer, because less than 24 hours earlier, a room full of people had tried. And every month, the room they used to do it sent rent to me. The first house I ever bought had water in the basement and a front step that leaned like it had given up. It was a duplex in Jamaica, Queens. 2 stories of cracked plaster, old pipes, and bad decisions made by people who came before me. The listing photos were almost generous, which is how I learned real estate agents could make mold look like character. I was 24. Lena was still in school. I had no husband, no trust fund, no rich uncle waiting to rescue me. What I had was a first-time homebuyer program, every dollar I had saved, a small loan Aunt Marlene insisted on calling a gift, and the kind of fear that either breaks you or teaches you math. The bank officer looked at me over her glasses and said, "You understand this property needs work." I said, "So do I." That house smelled like damp wood and old cigarette smoke. The basement flooded after the first heavy rain. The kitchen cabinets hung crooked. The upstairs bathroom sink leaked into the ceiling below. At night, I could hear mice moving in the walls like tiny thieves. I could not afford a full crew, so I learned. At the Queens Public Library, I checked out books on plumbing, drywall, leases, and landlord-tenant law. On my lunch breaks, I watched repair videos with the volume low. After work, I stopped by a hardware store where an old contractor named Gene took pity on me. "You don't fix a house by staring at everything wrong," he told me one night, handing me a pipe wrench. "You fix the leak in front of you." And that became my rule. 1 leak, 1 wall, 1 broken tile, 1 overdue bill. I worked breakfast shifts, then came home and pulled up ruined flooring until my knees bruised. I learned to shut off water valves, patch drywall, replace trap pipes, sand cabinets, and speak to inspectors without sounding scared. Lena did homework at a folding table in the corner while I worked. Sometimes she complained about the noise. Sometimes she fell asleep with a textbook open beside her. I never told her I was terrified the bank would take the place before I figured out how to keep it. When the upstairs unit was finally livable, I rented it to a bus driver named Mrs. Harlan and her teenage son. The first rent check she handed me felt heavier than any paycheck I had ever earned. Not because it made me rich, because it meant the house could breathe. The rent paid part of the mortgage. My kitchen job paid the rest. I kept receipts in shoe boxes, then folders, then proper files after Martin Bellamy scolded me like a disappointed school principal. "Build it right, Nora," he said. "If you're going to own property, own paperwork too." So I did. Every LLC had records. Every lease was reviewed. Every repair had an invoice, even if the invoice was just a receipt for parts and a note in my own handwriting. I refinanced only when the numbers made sense. I bought the second property slower than pride wanted and faster than fear preferred. Then the third. Then more. Not skyscrapers. Not luxury towers with marble lobbies and doormen in gloves. Just old houses, tired buildings, stubborn boilers, and tenants who needed heat when the temperature dropped. 17 doors, Martin liked to call them. But I never counted doors. I counted people. A retired postal worker in Brooklyn who paid on the 3rd because his pension landed late. A nurse in the Bronx who worked nights and needed the hallway lights fixed before winter. A grandmother in Queens raising 2 boys who left toy cars in the stairwell, no matter how many times I warned her. Real estate taught me something the Whitmores never understood. A building is not valuable because it impresses strangers from the curb. It is valuable because someone can sleep inside it without being afraid. That was why I kept cooking at Harbor Haven. The apron did not shrink me. It anchored me. By the time Briarwood Garden Club came across Martin's desk in 2021, I knew how to read a wounded property. The pandemic had emptied its calendar, drained its reserves, and left the owners desperate for a clean sale. 21.5 acres in Westchester. Ballrooms, gardens, event contracts, a reputation polished enough to hide all the cracks underneath. Martin asked if I was sure. I looked at the numbers. I looked at the land. I thought of every room I had ever been told I did not belong in. Then I signed through NNV Holdings, LLC, not to become one of them, to make sure people like them could never decide my worth again. Lena did not become ashamed of me in one day. That would have been easier to forgive. It started small, the way rot starts behind the painted wall. In high school, she stopped inviting friends over unless I was working late. In college, she told people I was in food service, which was true in the same way calling a house fire warm is true. When I showed up to her graduation in the navy dress I had worn to 3 other events, she hugged me fast and whispered, "You didn't have anything else?" I smiled because older sisters learn to swallow tiny cuts before they become arguments. Lena wanted out of Queens. I understood that. Queens had given us sirens, crowded trains, broken radiators, and neighbors who knew too much because walls were thin. But Queens had also given us Mrs. Donnelly's extra soup, Mr. Alvarez fixing our lock for free, Aunt Marlene driving 2 hours through rain, and 100 ordinary mercies Lena seemed determined to forget. Then she met Grant Whitmore. He arrived in her life polished from cufflink to haircut. He drove a black Range Rover, or cologne that smelled like cedar and money, and spoke as if every room had already agreed with him before he entered. Grant worked at Whitmore Lane Insurance Group, the firm his father Harold had built over 3 decades. He called Lena babe in that smooth, careless way that made her feel chosen. The first time I met him, he shook my hand and looked past me before letting go. "Lena says you cook," he said. "I do." "For a restaurant?" "A senior center." His smile sharpened for half a second. "That's noble." Noble. Not skilled, not steady, not hard. Noble. The word rich people use when they want to admire your sacrifice from a safe distance. Lena laughed too quickly and changed the subject. Vivian Whitmore was worse because she never made the mistake of sounding cruel. She invited me to brunch once at a place in Bronxville where the salad cost more than my weekly groceries used to. Vivian wore pearls the size of small prayers and spoke softly enough that everyone leaned in. "Nora," she said, stirring iced tea she barely drank, "Lena told us how hard you worked after your mother passed. Not everyone can rise above such a humble background." Lena stared down at her plate. I said, "We didn't rise above it. We survived it." Vivian's smile did not move. Of course. After the engagement, the distance grew manners. At holiday dinners, I was seated near the kitchen door because it's easier for the servers to pass. At charity luncheons, Lena introduced me as my sister Nora. She works with seniors, and then hurried toward donors before anyone asked more. When Vivian mentioned family photos, she somehow always chose the ones taken when I was in the restroom or helping someone carry trays. Harold Whitmore spoke less, but his silence had a ledger. He measured people by schools, surnames, zip codes, and assets. Since I offered him none he cared to see, he filed me under obligation. Lena changed her clothes first, then her laugh, then her stories. She stopped talking about apartment 3B. She stopped saying Mom's name around the Whitmores. She stopped remembering that the first birthday cake she ever had after the funeral was made from a box mix I burned around the edges and covered with too much frosting. One December, before a Whitmore Christmas dinner, Lena called me from her bedroom while I sat in traffic on the RFK Bridge. "Nora," she said, voice tight, "just tonight, can you not mention the old apartment?" I watched brake lights blur red in the cold windshield. "Why would I?" "I don't know. Sometimes you tell stories." "Stories about us?" She sighed. "Grant's family doesn't need all that." All that. Our mother, our winter, our hunger, our survival. I said, "All right, Lena." She sounded relieved. That hurt more than the request. By the time she married Grant, my sister had learned the Whitmore language fluently. She knew when to smile, when to apologize for taking up space, when to pretend a knife was a compliment because it came wrapped in linen. And I kept showing up, because once, in a frozen apartment in Queens, I had promised an 8-year-old girl she would never be left behind. I just had not understood she might one day leave me standing there alone. That night, I laid the blanket across my kitchen table and smoothed every square with the flat of my hand. Outside, the train screamed past Astoria like it was trying to shake the whole block awake. Inside, my apartment was quiet enough for old pain to speak. I could have called Vivian Whitmore. I could have told her the ballroom where she tilted her chin at me belonged to my company. I could have told Grant that his polished shoes had stood on floors paid for by a woman he called a lunch lady. But that would have been cheap, and I had not survived Ray Navarro, broken pipes, court papers, and winter without heat just to become cheap. So I made coffee, opened the hallway closet, and pulled out the fireproof file box behind my old coats. Inside were the documents Vivian would have fainted over if manners allowed her to faint. NNV Holdings, LLC. Purchase agreement, tax records, operating lease. Briarwood Garden Club and Event Hall, acquired in 2021. I read the papers anyway. Not because I doubted them, but because facts calm me. Feelings can lie. Paperwork usually knows better. Grant Whitmore was not my problem because he insulted me. He became my problem because the insult reminded me how carefully I had been ignoring his numbers. Grant made about $101,000 a year at Whitmore and Lane Insurance Group. A strong salary, sure, but not strong enough for the life he performed. The Range Rover, the watches, the St. Bart's trip Lena posted and deleted after I asked how long they were staying, the country club dues, the new nursery furniture, the dinners where wine arrived without anyone looking at the price. Lena did not work. Vivian loved expensive things, but hated paying for other people's mistakes. Harold Whitmore was comfortable, but not the kind of father who wrote blank checks without asking why. Something did not add up. And I had heard pieces before. At Harbor Haven, people told me things while waiting for oatmeal. Not because I asked, because older people know who listens. Mrs. Whitcomb once said her long-term care policy vanished into some computer hole, even though she had paid every month. Mr. Liu had complained about a joint life policy that kept showing different figures depending on who answered the phone. Another woman whispered that a young man at Whitmore and Lane told her not to bother the main office because he would handle it personally. At the time, I told myself insurance was complicated. Now I heard Grant laughing over my blanket, and complicated began to sound like convenient. The next morning, I did not storm anywhere. Storming is for people who want attention more than answers. I went to First Metro Credit Union, sat across from a banker named Carla, and requested 5 years of statements, liquidity confirmations, and clean copies of business reserve records. I moved a legal amount into my attorney's trust account for professional review, investigation costs, and whatever came next. Carla raised an eyebrow. "Everything all right, Miss Navarro?" "No," I said, "but it's going to be documented." By noon, I was in Martin Bellamy's office in Midtown. Martin had been my attorney since I owned one leaking duplex and thought an LLC sounded like something rich men used to hide boats. He was older now, silver at the temples, still allergic to drama and sloppy files. He listened without interrupting while I explained Grant's lifestyle, the comments from seniors, the baby shower, and my concern that Lena might be too close to whatever her husband was doing. When I finished, Martin leaned back. "You understand what you're suggesting." "I understand what I'm not willing to ignore. If this touches your sister, it gets ugly." "It's already ugly. I just want it honest." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "I know someone. Judith Kane, forensic accounting, retired from a major firm, careful, stubborn, and impossible to impress." "Good," I said. "I don't need impressed. I need clean." Martin picked up the phone. I looked out his window at the city below, all those buildings stacked with secrets, money, fear, and locked doors. For most of my life, I had fixed only the leak in front of me. This time, the water was coming through the ceiling. Judith Kane did not look like the kind of woman who chased secrets. She wore a plain black coat, carried a leather folder instead of a laptop bag, and had the calm face of someone who had watched powerful men lie under oath and still made her train home on time. We met in Martin's conference room on a rainy Thursday. Before I could tell her everything, she raised one hand. "I don't hack accounts," she said. "I don't trick employees. I don't take files someone stole from a locked cabinet. If we touch this, we touch it clean." "Well, that's why I'm here." Judith studied me over her glasses. "Good. Because dirty evidence makes guilty men lucky." That sentence stayed with me. I gave her what I had: Grant's visible lifestyle, his salary range, the complaints I had heard at Harbor Haven, and the names of seniors who had mentioned Whitmore and Lane Insurance Group. I did not give her guesses dressed as facts. Judith would have thrown them back at me. For the next 2 weeks, she worked quietly. No drama. No late-night movie nonsense. Just phone calls, public records, former employee outreach, old complaint trails, and careful permission from people willing to share their own documents. The first real crack was Tessa Park. Tessa had been an account coordinator at Whitmore and Lane until the previous year. She met us at a diner in Flushing, wearing a raincoat too thin for the weather, and the exhausted look of someone still angry at herself for being scared. "I thought I was bad at my job," she said, twisting a napkin. "That's what Grant made me believe." Judith did not comfort her too quickly. "Tell us what you saw." Tessa had noticed premium receipts from older clients that did not match the company's active system. Payments appeared in customer emails, bank confirmations, even scanned checks. But the internal records showed gaps, cancellations, or policy changes the clients claimed they never approved. "When I asked Grant," Tessa said, "he told me senior clients get confused. Then he told me confusion was contagious if I kept spreading it." A week later, she was written up. A month after that, pushed out for performance issues. But Tessa had kept copies of emails sent to her personal address by clients asking for help. She had an old spreadsheet she created to track mismatches before she was locked out. She had dates, names, amounts, and one note typed in all caps besides several entries. asked Grant, told to drop it. Judith's expression did not change, but I saw her pen stop for half a second. Then came Mrs. Eleanor Whitcomb from Yonkers. She was 82, with careful lipstick, swollen knuckles, and a voice that still expected people to behave decently. She had paid $410 a month for a long-term care policy she believed would keep her from becoming a burden on her daughter. I did everything right, Mrs. Whitcomb told us, sliding a folder across her kitchen table. That's what keeps me awake. I did everything right. Her statements showed payments. Her letters showed promises. But the policy record Judith later reviewed through documents Mrs. Whitcomb legally possessed did not match what she had been told. Samuel and June Lou had a similar story. They had paid $10,450 a year toward a joint life insurance plan, yet their file showed changes neither remembered signing. Mr. Lou tapped the paper with one finger. That is not my signature. Judith took a photograph only after he gave written permission. By the time Judith returned to Martin's office with her preliminary findings, the rain had stopped, but the city outside still looked washed gray. She laid out the pattern. Not proof beyond every doubt. Not yet, but enough. Premiums from older clients appeared to be diverted through a side account connected to client management fees. Several policy change forms looked suspicious. At least some clients had been told not to contact the main office. The names most often connected to those communications circle back to Grant. How many? I asked. Enough to justify a formal complaint, Judith said. Possibly dozens. I have a working list of 62 affected clients, but regulators would need subpoena power to know the full scope. 62. I thought of Harbor Haven at breakfast. Walkers lined by the wall, pill bottles and purses, people stretching fixed incomes over rent, groceries, medicine, and pride. Grant had not stolen from people who could simply call another banker. He had stolen from people counting on one promise to hold when their bodies no longer did. I looked at Mrs. Whitcomb's folder on the table. He didn't steal money, I said. He stole the years they thought were safe. Judith called while I was peeling eggs at Harbor Haven. Nora, she said, I found something involving Lena. The egg slipped from my hand and cracked in the sink. I stepped into the pantry and shut the door. Judith had traced client management fees to a side entity connected to Whitmore and Lane. Not the main account, a smaller structure, dressed in language so dull it felt designed to make honest people stop reading. Inside that paperwork were Lena's signatures, 3, maybe 4. One as an authorized signer, one on a resolution Grant had called Family Asset Protection. Does she know? I asked. I can't say, Judith replied. I don't see proof she accessed the account or received money, but her name is there. For years, I had pulled Lena out before trouble had teeth. A missed bill, a careless boyfriend, a forgotten form. Some part of me still believed love meant arriving before consequence. But this was not a parking ticket. This was Mrs. Whitcomb saying, I did everything right. This was Mr. Lou staring at a signature that was not his. This was 62 elderly clients believing their future was safe while someone cut holes in the net beneath them. I wanted to call Lena, but if I called too soon, fear would answer before truth. Grant would stand beside her by dinner. Vivian would turn panic into loyalty. What do we do? I asked. You take this to the proper authority, Judith said. That afternoon, I served lunch as if my hands belonged to someone calmer. Mrs. Bailey said the soup needed pepper. Mr. Alvarez told me my face looked like a closed church. Then Mrs. Whitcomb came through with her walker. I looked at her thin hands, at the purse where she kept insurance letters. That was when I stopped pretending this was only about my family. Friends, tell me in the comments, what would you do in Nora's place? Protect the sister she raised, or stand with the seniors being robbed in silence? Leave a like if this story has your heart. The truth behind that signature is bigger than one cruel baby shower. By 4 o'clock, I sat across from investigator Owen Mercer at the New York State Department of Financial Services. Judith laid out the file: client documents, Tessa Parks' emails, mismatched receipts, and the side entity where Lena's name appeared. If verified, Mercer said, this could involve insurance fraud, grand larceny, falsified records, exploitation of seniors, and possibly federal issues. And my sister? She may be a witness, a victim of coercion, a negligent participant, or something worse. Not decided today. Fair words can still cut. His office would move only if the evidence held. I signed the complaint. If my sister is innocent, I said, truth should protect her. If she is not, my silence shouldn't. The first visit to Whitmore Lane did not look dramatic. No flashing lights, no shouting, no reporters waiting on the sidewalk. Just 2 state employees in dark coats walking into the firm's White Plains office with folders, badges, and the kind of calm that makes guilty people sweat through their shirts. By noon, half the staff knew records had been requested. By 1, every private office door was closed. Grant called it a compliance review. That was the phrase Lena repeated when she phoned me 2 days later. It's just a compliance review, she said, like she had practiced it in a mirror. Grant says firms get them all the time. Do you believe him? Silence. Then her old defensiveness came back. I believe my husband. And I believe you leaving the shower made Vivian look terrible. There it was again. Not what they did to me, how I made them look. I could have reminded her of the blanket. I could have asked whether humiliation had a dress code in Westchester. Instead, I asked, are you safe? She made a small, offended sound. Nora, don't be dramatic. But I heard something behind her voice. A cabinet closing too hard. Grant saying her name from another room. She hung up quickly. The next week, Whitmore and Lane received preservation notices. Records were not to be altered, deleted, moved, or destroyed. Investigator Mercer's office requested client files, premium ledgers, internal emails, bank records, and policy change documents. Harold Whitmore called Grant into his office. I knew because Martin heard it from a contact who owed him nothing but respect. Harold was not a sentimental man. If his firm was exposed, he would not ask first who was hurt. He would ask who had endangered the company. At home, Grant began locking his study. Lena later told me he changed passwords, carried his phone into the shower, and stayed awake after midnight with bourbon and a laptop glowing blue against his face. When she asked what was wrong, he kissed her forehead. Pregnancy makes you anxious, babe. That was Grant's gift. He could turn a woman's instinct into a symptom. Then came the letter. Cease and desist. Grant's attorney accused me of harassment, defamation, tortious interference, and a few other expensive words meant to scare people who had never paid lawyers by the hour. Martin read it once, smiled without humor, and drafted a reply so clean it could have chilled soup. Ms. Navarro has provided information to the appropriate regulatory authority and will continue to cooperate fully with lawful requests. That was all. No insults, no threats. Just a locked door with legal hinges. Grant did not like locked doors unless he held the key. After that, he stopped pretending this was paperwork. He began digging into me. Not my properties. Those were protected behind entities Martin had built correctly. Not my bank accounts, too clean. Not my job, too honest. So Grant went backward. He found Ray Navarro in New Jersey, living in a rented room, owing money to men who did not send polite letters. My father had been gone so long that absence had become his only reliable trait. But Grant understood something cruel people always understand. Old wounds do not have to be fresh to bleed. That Friday, Lena called again. This time she did not mention Vivian. "Nora," she whispered, "Grant says someone is trying to destroy us." "Us?" I asked. She breathed shakily. Behind her, I heard Grant's voice, smooth and sharp. "Who are you talking to, babe?" The line went dead. Peter Caldwell slid the Briarwood proposal across my desk like it weighed more than paper. "It's possible," he said, "but not fast." I looked at the first page. Preliminary Senior Affordable Housing Conversion. Environmental review required. Zoning amendment likely. Traffic study. ADA. Accessibility. Public hearings. Financing layers. How long? Peter gave me the answer honest people give when they cannot sell a miracle. "Years, Nora. Maybe more if the neighborhood fights." "They'll fight. They already are." The moment word spread that Briarwood might become Whitcomb Commons, Westchester discovered a deep concern for community character. That phrase appeared in emails, flyers, and social media posts from people who had never cared who washed their glasses after fundraisers. They did not say they feared seniors with low incomes. They said parking. They said property values. They said tradition. Grant saw an opening and dressed himself as its guardian. The public meeting was held in a town hall with polished wood benches and a flag in the corner. Vivian sat near the front in a cream coat, looking wounded on behalf of old money. Harold sat beside her, jaw tight. Grant stood near the aisle, greeting neighbors like a candidate. Lena sat 2 rows behind him, one hand on her belly. I came with Peter and Martin. We did not bring emotion, we brought binders. A councilwoman opened the floor. The first speakers worried about traffic. The next worried about the wrong kind of development. One man said Briarwood had hosted generations of respectable families, as if elderly tenants were coming to steal the silverware. Then Grant stood. He spoke beautifully. Men like Grant always do when truth is not required. He called Briarwood a landmark. He called my proposal opportunistic. He called me a landlord from Queens trying to cash in on Westchester soil. A few people clapped. I remained seated. Then a man in the back row stood up. For 1 second, I did not recognize him. Ray Navarro had grown thinner, gray around the mouth, his jacket too large, his eyes still carrying that old talent for needing something. My stomach tightened before my mind caught up. "My name is Ray Navarro," he said. "I'm Nora's father." The room shifted. Grant lowered his eyes, hiding satisfaction badly. Ray gripped the microphone. "My daughter likes to act righteous, but she turned her back on family a long time ago. Now, she wants to judge everybody else while tearing down a place that means something to decent people." There are wounds you expect. Then there are wounds that walk into a public meeting wearing your father's face. I heard Lena inhale sharply. Ray kept talking. He did not mention leaving 2 girls after their mother died. He did not mention the $40 from the coffee can. Men like Ray edit history until they can survive their own reflection. Martin leaned toward me. "You don't have to answer that." But I stood, not fast, not angry, just stood. "My proposal is for seniors who need safe housing," I said. "Affordable housing is not an insult to a neighborhood. Fraud is. Abandonment is. Taking money from people who trusted you is." Grant's smile flickered. I did not look at Ray again. If I had, I might have said something too true for that room. After the meeting, people clustered outside under the yellow parking lot lights. Lena stood near a pillar, pale and quiet. I Saw It When She Saw It. Ray by Grant's SUV. A man from Grant's office pressed an envelope into Ray's hand. Ray tucked it inside his jacket without hesitation. Lena turned toward Grant. For the first time, she did not look confused. She looked afraid of what she had married. Vivian Whitmore chose a restaurant in Bronxville where the host did not ask for her name. He simply smiled, took her coat, and said, "Your usual table, Mrs. Whitmore." Lena told me later that was when she first felt small. Not poor, not embarrassed, small. Like every fork, glass, and folded napkin already knew she had married into a room that would never belong to her. Vivian sat across from her beneath the painting of sailboats and ordered sparkling water for both of them without asking. "You look tired, darling," and she said. Lena touched her belly. "I haven't been sleeping well." "Well, pregnancy does that. Stress does more." The waiter came and went. Vivian waited until he was gone before lowering her voice. "Grant tells me you've been anxious about the review." Lena looked down. "It seems bigger than a review." Vivian's smile held steady. "Men under pressure make mistakes. Wives decide whether those mistakes become scandals." That sentence landed harder than a slap because it came wrapped in linen. Lena stared at her. "Are you saying I should lie?" "I am saying," Vivian replied, "that families survive by standing together." Then she reached into her handbag and pulled out a slim folder. Lena recognized the tab immediately. Prenuptial agreement. Vivian did not push it across the table. She only rested one manicured hand on top of it. "You signed this freely before the wedding. Your attorney reviewed it." "My attorney was recommended by Grant." "Still an attorney." Vivian spoke as if fairness were a technicality. She reminded Lena about the reputation clause, the misconduct clause, the provisions tied to public embarrassment and financial harm to the Whitmore family. She mentioned legal bills, health insurance, the house, and the baby as if she were listing ingredients for soup. "You are carrying my grandchild," Vivian said. "I want you protected." Lena whispered, "From Grant?" Vivian's eyes hardened for the first time. "From poor choices." That was when Lena understood. Vivian did not care whether Grant had stolen from old people. She cared whether anyone could prove it loudly. Then came the sentence Lena would repeat to me 3 times later, each time like she was still trying to survive hearing it. "We welcomed you, Lena. Don't confuse that with belonging." The restaurant kept moving around them. Glasses chimed. Someone laughed at the bar. Outside, cars passed over clean pavement. Lena said she felt Queen's rise in her chest. Not as shame this time, but as grief. All the years she had tried to sand down her edges. All the time she had corrected her own stories before they sounded too hungry, too crowded, too real. And still, Vivian saw her as a guest who had overstayed the kindness. That night, Grant came home smelling of bourbon and cold air. He was gentle at first, too gentle. He found Lena in the nursery, standing beside the white crib Vivian had ordered. Grant kissed her temple and placed the document on the changing table. "Babe, I need you to sign this." "What is it?" "Just a clarification. For the side entity. Lawyers want everything clean." Lena looked at the pages. Words swam in front of her. Acknowledgement, authorization, prior knowledge, consent. Her hand moved to her belly. "I need to read it." Grant smiled, but his eyes did not. "You're tired. I'll explain." "I said I need to read it." The room changed. Not loudly, not all at once, but the warmth left his face as if someone had opened a window in February. He stepped closer and rested his palm over her stomach. You want our baby safe, don't you? Lena stopped breathing for a second. There it was. Not love, leverage. The man who once made Westchester feel like rescue was now using their unborn child as a lock on her mouth. She took one step back. Grant's hand fell away. For the first time in their marriage, Lena did not apologize for making him angry. She only folded the document once, placed it back on the changing table, and said, "Not tonight." Grant slept in his study, half upright in a leather chair, one hand near his phone, an empty bourbon glass on the floor. For years, that Westchester house had made Lena feel chosen. The staircase, marble counters, pale blue nursery and crib Vivian ordered from a catalog thicker than our old phone book. Everything was soft, polished, expensive. That night, it all felt staged. She went into the nursery. Moonlight lay across the boxes by the wall. Tiffany, cashmere, silver. Perfect things from perfect people who had looked at my blanket like it carried a disease. Lena pulled a cardboard memory box from the closet. I had mailed it after her wedding, before I understood she was trying to leave every part of us behind. Inside were photos, report cards, notes, and scraps I had saved, because poverty teaches you nothing is small if love touched it. Then she found the letter. Mom's handwriting was weak, thinner than it had been before cancer stole the weight from her hand. Nora, I am sorry you have to grow up too soon. If I am not here, please don't let Lena think she was left behind. But don't let her forget how much you loved her either. Lena told me later she read it twice, then pressed it to her chest. Memory came back without mercy. Me sewing wings onto a butterfly costume at midnight. Me burning a box birthday cake and hiding the dark edges under frosting. Me sitting outside her classroom after Mom died because she was afraid I would disappear too. Me pretending soup was dinner because soup was all I had. And then the blanket. 30 squares, 30 proofs. Not a poor woman's awkward gift, but a map of every time I had shown up. Lena cried until morning turned the windows gray. At Harbor Haven, I was lining up lunch trays when she appeared in the kitchen doorway. No makeup, hair loose, eyes swollen, coat button wrong. "Nora," she said. I pulled off one glove. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head. "I sign things," she whispered. "Grant said they were for tax planning, family protection. I didn't ask enough questions." And the kitchen noise fell away. Now he wants me to sign another statement. It says I knew about the side account, that I approved things before I understood what they were. I wanted to hug her. But forgiveness given too early can become another room for a frightened person to hide in. So I took off the other glove, washed my hands, and faced my sister. If you want a new life, Lena, it starts with the truth, not with my forgiveness. Her mouth trembled. "Will you come with me?" I looked at the lunch trays, the seniors beyond the swinging doors, and the life I had built by not running from hard things. "Yes," I said, "but you're the one who has to speak." Samantha Greer's office was not decorated to comfort anyone. No flowers, no family photos, no soft music. Just gray walls, law books, a conference table, and one window looking down at midtown traffic that kept moving no matter whose life was falling apart above it. Lena sat beside me with both hands around a paper cup of water. Samantha read the first page of Grant's statement, then the second. Her face did not change, but her pen stopped twice. "You were smart not to sign this," she said. Lena swallowed. "Am I in trouble?" Samantha looked at her directly. "Yes." My sister flinched. "Trouble does not mean guilty," Samantha continued. but your signature is on financial documents tied to a side entity. That has consequences. Fear is context, not a magic eraser. Lena nodded like every word weighed something. I slid a retainer check across the table. Samantha did not touch it yet. Miss Navarro, if I take this, I represent Lena, not you, not your business interest, not your feelings. Well, that's why we're here, I said. Lena turned toward me, startled. For years, I had handled the dangerous room before she entered it. This time, I could only walk her to the door. 2 days later, we met investigator Owen Mercer. Lena brought emails, text messages, drafts Grant had sent, and notes she had saved without understanding why. Samantha placed everything on the table in careful order. Mercer asked hard questions. Did she access the account? No. Did she receive transfers? No. Did she speak with clients about premiums? No. Did she sign documents without reading them? Lena closed her eyes. Yes. Why? Her voice cracked. Because Grant told me that was how families with money protected themselves. And because I wanted to believe I belonged to one. No one rescued her from the silence after that. Mercer asked about Vivian, Harold, the prenup, the lunch, Grant's threat in the nursery. Samantha objected when needed, clarified when needed, and let Lena answer when truth required pain. By the end, my sister looked smaller but cleaner, like a house after a storm has torn off the fake shutters. Outside the building, she stopped near the curb. I kept waiting for you to tell them it wasn't my fault, she said. It was not all your fault. That's not the same. No, I said. It isn't. A taxi honked. Wind pushed her hair across her face. Lena looked at the city, then back at me. I don't want you to save me anymore, Nora. For the first time that day, she sounded like someone standing on her own feet. I just want to stop lying. By the time Martin called the meeting at Briarwood, the case had grown legs strong enough to walk without me. Investigator Mercer had subpoenaed records from Whitmore and Lane, banks, and insurance carriers. Judith's preliminary pattern had become something colder. Side accounts, altered client files, deleted emails recovered through proper channels, and policy forms carrying signatures that did not belong to the people named beneath them. Tessa Park's spreadsheet matched too many official records to be dismissed as bitterness. Lena's messages showed Grant pushing, coaching, and then threatening. Mercer did not tell me everything. He was careful that way. But he said enough for me to understand Grant was no longer dealing with embarrassment. He was dealing with handcuffs. Still, Grant arrived at Briarwood like a man entering his own club. He wore a charcoal suit and that same expensive watch. Vivian came beside him in winter white, her chin lifted as if the air belonged to her family. Harold looked older than I remembered. Not kind, just tired in the way men look when money stops protecting them from facts. Lena came with Samantha. She wore a plain black dress and no jewelry except her wedding ring, which hung loose on her finger. I came with Martin and Peter Caldwell. We met in the smaller garden room, the one with tall windows overlooking the lawn, where Westchester brides had posed for photographs for decades. Grant did not sit. What is this? He asked. Another performance from the cafeteria sister with a grudge? Lena's face tightened, but she stayed quiet. I placed a folder on the table, not a thick one. Truth does not always need bulk. Sit down, Grant. He laughed. You don't give instructions here. Martin opened the folder and slid the first document toward Harold. Actually, Martin said, Miss Navarro does. Vivian made a small sound, almost amused. Excuse me? Martin tapped the page. Briarwood Garden Club and Event Hall was purchased in 2021 by NNV Holdings, LLC. The deed, tax records, purchase agreement, and operating lease are all included. Miss Nora Navarro is the beneficial owner. The room went so still I could hear the old clock near the mantel. Vivian looked at the document, then at me, waiting for the joke to reveal itself. Harold reached for his reading glasses. Grant's mouth opened, but nothing useful came out. "You're lying," Vivian said. "No," Martin replied. "That will be your son's department." I should not have enjoyed that, but I did. Grant snatched up the page, scanned it, then looked at me with an expression I had never seen on him before. Fear without polish. I turned to Lena. "I didn't hide this to shame you," I said. "I hid it because I wanted you to learn something before money touched it. A person's worth is not printed on a country club invitation." Her eyes filled, but she did not look away. Vivian stood, color rising under her makeup. "This is obscene. You let us hold a family event here while pretending to be some poor kitchen woman?" I looked at her carefully. "I've never pretended to be poor. You pretended my work made me less than you." Grant stepped toward me. "You think owning dirt makes you untouchable?" "No," I said. "I think stealing from old people makes you careless." The door opened before he could answer. Investigator Owen Mercer entered with 2 officers behind him. Grant turned, and all the blood left his face. For once. Briarwood did not feel like Vivian Whitmore's stage. It felt like a room that had finally remembered who owned the floor. Investigator Mercer did not raise his voice. That made it worse for Grant. "Grant Whitmore," he said, "you are under arrest in connection with insurance fraud, grand larceny, falsification of business records, financial exploitation of elderly clients, and obstruction of an active investigation." Vivian gripped the back of a chair. "This is absurd." Mercer did not look at her. "Mrs. Whitmore, step back." One of the officers moved toward Grant. Grant lifted both hands as if offended by the air itself. "You don't understand the structure. These were temporary reallocations. Client funds get moved all the time." "Not into a side account used for personal expenses," Mercer said. Harold closed his eyes. The room seemed to shrink around the words. Mercer opened a folder. "Current verified losses are approximately $742,000. 62 affected clients identified so far, most over the age of 70. I thought of Mrs. Whitcomb's careful lipstick, Mr. Liu's finger tapping a signature he had not written. Breakfast trays, pill bottles, pensions stretched thin enough to see through. Grant laughed once, too loudly. "This is Nora. She put you up to this." Mercer finally looked at him. "Miss Navarro filed a complaint. Evidence did the rest." That was the sound of a door locking. Grant's face twisted toward Lena. "You talked." Lena stood beside Samantha, one hand over her belly. "You told me I was protecting our family," she said. "I was protecting you." "No, you were using me." Vivian spun toward Lena so fast her pearls shifted against her throat. "You ungrateful little girl," she hissed. "We brought you into this family. We gave you a name, a home, a life you never could have touched on your own." Lena flinched, but she did not sit down. "For a while," she said, voice shaking, "I believed that. That was my shame." Vivian pointed at her. "You were a girl from Queens who wanted everything we had. Don't pretend you were innocent because your little kitchen sister bought herself a piece of land." The old Lena would have folded. This one looked at me first, then back at Vivian. "I was wrong for staying silent," Lena said. "I was wrong for wanting your approval so badly. I let you humiliate the woman who raised me. But I will not sign one more lie for this family." Grant lunged half a step toward her. The officer caught his arm. "You think Nora cares about you?" he snapped. "She wants to watch us burn because she's a bitter lunch lady who couldn't stand that you married up." Something in Lena changed then. Not loudly, not with tears. She simply lifted her chin. "Don't call my sister that," she said. Queens is where she kept me alive. The room went quiet in a way the baby shower never had. This silence had bones. Mercer read Grant his rights. The officer turned him gently but firmly, and the cuffs clicked closed around wrists that had worn watches bought with other people's fear. Vivian sank into a chair as if her knees had forgotten privilege. Harold opened his eyes. "What happens to the clients?" Mercer looked at him. "That depends on how quickly your firm cooperates." Harold nodded once, old pride collapsing into arithmetic. "We'll cooperate. Independent audit, restitution fund, whatever is required." He did not become noble in that moment. He became practical. Sometimes that is the closest men like Harold get to decency. 2 days later, Ray Navarro came to my building in Astoria. He waited by the front steps, hat in both hands, smaller than the ghost he had been in my life. "Nora," he said, "I made a mistake." "No, Ray, you made a choice." His mouth tightened when I did not call him Dad. "I owe people money." "I know." "I thought maybe, after everything." I looked at the man who had sold my pain for an envelope in a parking lot. "You had 2 daughters," I said. "You walked away from both. This time, I'm the one walking." I left him there and went upstairs. Behind me, the elevated train thundered past, shaking the windows like applause nobody had asked for. Lena left the Westchester house with 2 suitcases, swollen ankles, and no audience. There was no grand speech on the front steps, no rainstorm, no music. Just Samantha Greer loading boxes into a borrowed SUV while Vivian watched from an upstairs window and did not come down. The divorce was ugly in the ordinary way rich divorces are ugly. Lawyers circled the prenup, joint accounts froze. Every signature Lena had ever placed near Grant's money was examined until even her mistakes had paperwork. She was not forgiven by the world because she cried. That mattered. Some nights she called me and said nothing for a full minute. I let the silence sit between us. Love could answer, but it could not erase. 3 months later, she gave birth to a daughter. She named her Rosalind and called her Rosie at home. When the nurse placed that tiny girl in my arms, Lena whispered, "I wanted her to carry something good." I looked down at the baby's closed fists. Then give her a life that teaches her what good costs. Lena moved back to Queens after that, into a 2-bedroom apartment in one of my buildings. She paid reduced rent, not free rent. I had learned the difference between helping someone stand and building another soft place for them to hide. Peter Caldwell started her at the bottom. Phones, maintenance logs, tenant notices, heating complaints, elevator inspections, rent questions from people embarrassed to ask for 3 more days. The first time an elderly tenant cried because her prescription cost more than expected, Lena came to the office restroom and broke down. "I used to think this work was small," she said. "No," I told her. "You were taught to look from too high up." She learned slowly. She misfiled forms. She apologized too much. She took the subway with a stroller and stopped wearing shame like jewelry. Some days I saw the girl I raised. Other days I saw a woman I was only beginning to know. I changed too. I told her things I had buried under competence. The culinary letter I never answered. The guardianship hearing. The nights I patched pipes until my hands split. The morning I almost lost the first duplex because I was short on escrow. She listened without defending herself. That was how we healed. Not with one hug, with truth repeated until it became safe. Whitcomb Commons took years. Westchester fought zoning. Engineers studied drainage. Lawyers argued permits. Architects redesigned entrances for walkers and wheelchairs. Funding came in pieces. Every public hearing tested my patience, but I had learned from old houses. Fix the leak in front of you. The first phase opened with 52 apartments. Mrs. Eleanor Whitcomb cut the ribbon with trembling hands. Her daughter cried before the scissors closed. Behind them stood a building with wide hallways, a small clinic, a community dining room, raised garden beds, and a shuttle van waiting by the curb. 3 years later, all 108 homes were finished. Briarwood, where Grant had mocked my blanket, now sheltered the kind of people he had robbed. After the ceremony, Lena stood beside me with Rosie on her hip. "Do you still have it?" she asked. "The blanket?" She nodded. "I like my daughter to know where we came from." I thought of that gift table. Vivian's smile, Grant's laugh, Lena's silence. "It's behind glass in Astoria," I said. "And one day, it can be hers." Lena wiped her cheek. "When?" "When you want it less because you feel guilty, and more because you're living in a way that honors every square." That night, the train rattled my apartment windows like it always had. The blanket hung on the wall, 30 pieces of a life nobody in Westchester had been able to price. Grant lost everything because he knew the cost of champagne and never learned the value of trust. Vivian lost her throne because manners without mercy are just cruelty in pearls. Ray lost his last chance because some fathers sell the only thing they should have protected. And me? I still woke before sunrise. I still cooked oatmeal at Harbor Haven. I still drove my old Honda through Queens. Only now, when someone called me a kitchen woman, I smiled. Because these hands had fed seniors, built homes, exposed a thief, and stitched a family history from scraps the world almost threw away. In life, never mistake quiet work for weakness, and never laugh at a gift made from love. Truth may walk slowly, but when it arrives, it brings every hidden bill with it. If this story touched your heart, please leave a like for the channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us where you are listening from. Thank you for staying until the end. Wishing you health, peace, and strength. See you again in the next story on Revenge Glow.